A cold wind moved through the small-town church on the day of Daniel Carter's funeral. The sky was covered with heavy grey clouds, and the sound of slow rain echoed on the old church roof. The people inside sat in silent rows, all wearing dark clothes, all with heavy hearts. The smell of flowers mixed with the smell of rain, creating a strange sadness in the air. Margaret Carter, Daniel's mother, stood near the front of the church. She was a thin, gentle woman in her late 60s. Her hands shook as she held a small white handkerchief. Her eyes were red from hours of crying, but tears still kept falling. She looked at the coffin, a dark wooden box that held the body of her only son. Daniel was all she had in this world. He was her pride, her happiness, her reason to wake up every morning. Now he was gone. Her heart felt like it was breaking inside her chest. She reached out and touched the coffin gently. "Goodbye, my boy," she whispered. But before she could even finish her words, a sharp voice cut through the silence of the church. "Enough." Her daughter-in-law, Emily Carter, stood behind her. Emily was a young woman in her early 30s with straight blonde hair and a cold expression. Her face had no tears. Her voice had no sadness. She looked at Margaret as if she was tired of her. "Stop crying," Emily said in a hard and loud whisper, loud enough for almost everyone in the first few rows to hear. "You need to pack your bags and leave my house today." The entire church turned their eyes toward them. Margaret felt her heart stop. Her hands froze on the coffin. She slowly turned to face Emily. What did you say?" she asked, her voice shaking. Emily stepped closer. Her heels clicked on the church floor, breaking the quiet. "I said stop crying," Emily repeated. "And get out of my house. Today. After the funeral." Margaret couldn't believe what she was hearing. Her son's funeral, and Emily was throwing her out? In front of everyone? I have nowhere else to go," Margaret whispered softly. Her voice trembled with fear and confusion. "That's not my problem," Emily said coldly. A woman in the second row gasped. A man looked down, uncomfortable. Even Pastor James, who stood near the altar, looked shocked. But Emily didn't care. She looked at Margaret with eyes full of irritation, not grief. "You have been living with us for months," Emily continued. "Daniel didn't want that. He told me he wanted space. He told me he was tired of your interference." Margaret felt a deep pain in her chest. Her son. Her Daniel. He loved her. He always treated her with kindness. He would never say such cruel things. "That's not true," Margaret whispered. "It is," Emily snapped. "He didn't want you in our house. And now that he's gone, I'm telling you to leave. So stop crying and stop acting like the victim." More eyes turned toward them. Some people whispered. Some looked away to avoid the tension. But Emily didn't stop. "You ruined things," Emily said loudly. "You made him stressed. You never listened to us. So now, just go." Margaret felt like the church suddenly turned upside down. She couldn't breathe. Her legs felt weak. She held onto the side of a chair to keep herself from falling. How could Emily be so cruel on such a day? Before Margaret could respond, a flash of light caught her eye. It was something around Emily's neck. Margaret looked closer. A necklace. A very expensive one. Diamonds. Real diamonds. Daniel could never afford such a thing. He was drowning in debt. He always told Margaret he could barely pay the bills. He worked long hours just to keep food on the table. So how did Emily suddenly have a diamond necklace? On the day of the funeral? Margaret's stomach twisted with suspicion. She also noticed something else. Detective Collins stood near the back of the church. A tall man in his 40s with a serious face. He was talking quietly to Pastor James, but his eyes kept drifting toward Emily. Margaret stepped back and listened. She could only catch small pieces of their conversation. The timeline doesn't match. Still investigating. Something feels off. Margaret felt a chill run down her spine. Something feels off. What did that mean? Was Daniel's death not an accident? Suddenly, Emily leaned even closer to her voice cold as ice. "You have 1 hour after this funeral," Emily said. "Take your things and go. I don't want to see you again." Margaret opened her mouth but no words came out. She felt like she had been slapped. Emily stepped away and walked to the front, pretending nothing had happened. She even wiped a fake tear from her cheek as she sat down. Margaret stood there alone, trembling, humiliated. Pastor James slowly approached her. "Are you all right, Margaret?" he whispered gently. Margaret shook her head. Tears filled her eyes again. She told me to leave," Margaret whispered. Pastor James looked shocked. "Today? Here?" Margaret nodded. He slowly placed a hand on her shoulder. "I'm so sorry." But Margaret didn't respond. She couldn't. Her mind was swirling with pain, confusion, and now suspicion. Why was Emily so eager to kick her out? Why was she wearing expensive jewelry? Why were detectives still asking questions? The service continued, but Margaret could not focus. Every word, every prayer, every song felt distant. Her heart was drowning in fear and doubt. When the funeral ended, the crowd slowly walked outside to the cemetery. Rain fell harder now, like the sky was crying for Daniel. Emily walked ahead, talking to people, crying loudly as if she was the victim. But her tears looked strange, almost forced. Margaret walked behind her, alone, unnoticed. At the graveside, as the coffin was lowered into the ground, Margaret felt her knees weaken. She grabbed the side of the tent to hold herself up. "I love you, Daniel," she whispered. "I will always love you." Emily glanced at her with irritation, then turned away. As the ceremony ended, Margaret stepped away from the crowd. She watched from a distance as Emily laughed, with a tall man wearing a black coat. He handed her something small. Emily quickly hid it in her pocket when she saw Margaret looking. Margaret's heartbeat quickened. Who was that man? Why was Emily hiding things? A few minutes later, Detective Collins approached Margaret quietly. "Mrs. Carter," he said in a careful tone. "I need to speak with you soon. About Daniel." Margaret looked up, afraid. "What about him?" she whispered. The detective's eyes were serious. "His death may not be what it seems." A cold shock hit Margaret from head to toe. She felt the world move under her feet. Her breath froze. Detective Collins continued, "I'll explain everything later. But for now, please stay safe." Stay safe? Why would she need to stay safe? Margaret stepped back, trembling. Emily's cold voice echoed in her head. "Stop crying. Pack your bags. Leave my house today." Margaret looked at Emily again. She was standing with the same mysterious man, whispering something. The man kept glancing around nervously. The necklace. The man in the black coat. The detective's warning. The strange timeline. Everything felt wrong. Margaret wrapped her arms around herself as the rain soaked her clothes. She had nowhere to go, no one to depend on. But one thing became clear inside her heart. Daniel didn't just die. Something happened. Something terrible. And Emily was hiding something. As the rain poured down harder, Margaret whispered to her son's grave. "Daniel, my boy, I don't know what happened to you. But I swear, I will find the truth." She turned and walked out of the cemetery alone, her clothes wet, her heart broken, but her mind full of suspicion. Behind her, Emily watched her leave with a cold smile. She had no idea what was coming next. The rain had stopped by the time Margaret reached the small-town motel where she planned to spend the night. She walked slowly, her shoes soaked, her coat dripping water across the floor. The motel was old, with faded paint and buzzing lights, but it was the only place she could go. The receptionist gave her a key without asking questions. He looked at her with quiet pity, knowing she had just come from a funeral. When she entered the room, she closed the door behind her and stood still for a long moment. The room was small, with a single bed, a wooden chair, and a tiny window that showed a dark, empty parking lot. Everything looked lonely. Everything felt cold. She sat on the edge of the bed and held her hands tightly. The image of Emily at the funeral replayed in her mind again and again, her cold eyes, her loud voice, her cruel words. "Stop crying. Leave my house." How could someone say that to a grieving mother? And why was she in such a hurry to push her out? Margaret tried to rest, but her heart wouldn't calm down. She remembered something else. Daniel had called her 1 week before his death. His voice had been tense, nervous, like he wanted to say something but didn't know how. "Mom. Emily is hiding something," he had said softly. "I can't talk right now, but I'll tell you soon." Those words now echoed in her ears like a warning from the grave. She stood up, paced the room, and tried to understand what was happening. Daniel's death was called an accident. He slipped and fell down the stairs, they said. But Daniel was always careful. He never used to run. He never drank. He was not careless. Something about the story didn't sit right with her. Just then, there was a soft knock at her door. Margaret's heart jumped. For a second she feared it might be Emily. She walked slowly to the door, opened it a small inch, and was surprised to see a familiar face. Detective Collins. "Mrs. Carter," he said in a low voice. "May I come in?" Margaret nodded and stepped aside. The detective entered the room, closed the door behind him, and removed his hat. His presence filled the small room. His face was serious, his eyes sharp, like someone who had seen too many tragedies and knew how to read silence. "I'm sorry to come so soon after the funeral," he said quietly. "But I need to speak with you." Margaret sat down and tried to steady herself. "You said earlier, his death might not be what it seems." "Yes," Collins replied. "At first, everything looked like a simple accident. But small details, they don't add up." Margaret leaned forward. "What kind of details?" The detective hesitated. "For example, the medical examiner found bruises on Daniel's arms. Bruises that look like someone grabbed him, not like he fell on his own. Also, the angle of his fall seems strange. And then there's the matter of his phone." "What about his phone?" Margaret asked. "It went missing after his death," Collins said. "Emily reported losing it. But we traced it. Someone wiped all the messages before it disappeared." Margaret's heart dropped. "Someone deleted his messages?" "Yes. All of them." Margaret closed her eyes for a moment. Daniel had always texted her. If the messages were gone, someone had a reason to hide something. "Did you talk to Emily?" she asked. Collins nodded slowly. "I did. But she was defensive, nervous, and she got angry when I asked simple questions." Margaret took a shaky breath. "Detective, Emily told me to leave the house today. She said my son didn't want me there." Collins frowned. "That doesn't make sense. Daniel told his close co-workers he was planning to bring you into the house permanently because of your age. He wanted to take care of you." Tears filled Margaret's eyes again. "That's what I thought. He loved me." Collins continued, "There's more. We found a large life insurance policy taken out on Daniel 3 months ago." Margaret felt her throat tighten. "A life insurance policy?" "Yes," the detective said. "And the primary beneficiary is Emily." Margaret felt the room spinning. A dark thought formed in her mind, one she didn't want to think, but couldn't ignore anymore. "Are you saying," she whispered, "that Emily may have wanted him gone?" Collins didn't answer. But his silence said enough. He stood up. "Mrs. Carter, I will continue investigating. But you must be careful. If she told you to leave, she may want you out of the way." Fear washed over Margaret. "But why me?" "Because you're the only one who truly knew Daniel," he said. "The only one who might see the truth." After he left, Margaret locked the door and sat on the bed, trembling. She thought about Daniel's message from last month. He had sent her a voice note that she never deleted. She opened her old phone and searched for it. When it played, Daniel's voice filled the quiet room. "Mom, if anything happens to me, don't trust Emily. Please. Just listen to me. She's not what she seems." Margaret covered her mouth, tears rolling down her cheeks. Her son had warned her. He had been afraid. Something was terribly wrong. Suddenly, there was another knock on the door. This time, it wasn't soft. It was loud, hard, angry. Margaret froze. She didn't move. She didn't speak. "Margaret, a familiar voice said through the door. "Open the door. Now." It was Emily. Margaret stepped back, panic rising inside her. Why was Emily here? How did she find the motel? What did she want? Emily knocked again, harder. "I know you're inside. Open the door." Margaret swallowed hard. She stayed silent. After a long moment, Emily's voice lowered to a threatening whisper. "If you don't stop talking to people, you will regret it." Then footsteps. Fast footsteps leaving. Margaret waited until the hallway was silent. Only then did she breathe again. The next morning, Margaret woke early. She knew she couldn't stay in the motel forever. She had to find answers. She had to understand what happened to her son. She walked to a small cafe across the street. She sat near the window and watched the cars passing by. Every little sound made her jump. While she was drinking her coffee, she saw something strange outside. Emily. She was standing across the road, talking to the same mysterious man from the funeral, the man with the black coat. They were speaking quietly, looking around as if watching for someone. Margaret lowered her head and hid behind the menu, but she kept watching them through the reflection in the glass. The man handed Emily an envelope. She opened it and counted what looked like money. A lot of money. She put the envelope quickly into her purse. The man leaned down and whispered something into her ear. Emily nodded and gave a small smile. A cold, wicked smile. Margaret felt sick. Emily wasn't grieving. She wasn't sad. She was planning something. And she was meeting men in secret. Why? For what? Margaret waited until they walked away before leaving the cafe. She followed them from a safe distance, moving slowly, staying hidden behind cars and trees. She watched as they arrived at a dark grey car. Emily looked around, then kissed the man on the cheek before getting in. Margaret's heart cracked. She always suspected Emily didn't love Daniel. But seeing her with another man just days after Daniel's death was too much. It wasn't only disrespect. It was cruel. The car drove off. Margaret stood alone on the sidewalk. She felt weak, but also angry. If Emily was hiding something, Margaret needed to find it. She decided to go back to Daniel's house, her house too, at least until Emily forced her out. Maybe she could collect her things. Maybe she could look for answers. It took her almost an hour to walk across town. When she reached the house, she felt her chest tighten. The house looked quiet, too quiet. The curtains were closed. The door was locked. But she had her old key. She inserted it, turned it slowly, and stepped inside. The house smelled different. Not like Daniel's home. It smelled like perfume, expensive and sharp. She walked slowly through the living room. She saw Daniel's pictures missing from the shelves. Only Emily's photos remained. It made her sick. She went to Daniel's study room. Emily had told everyone Daniel fell down the stairs. The stairs were across from the study, but Margaret noticed something. The railing was broken. Freshly broken. As if someone pushed something, or someone, hard. She touched the broken wood. Splinters stuck to her fingers. A cold shiver ran through her body. She opened the study drawer. Inside, she found bills, papers, receipts. Daniel had been struggling financially much more than she knew. But there was something else. A small locked drawer at the bottom. Margaret pulled it. It didn't open. She remembered Daniel once told her he kept important things in a secret place. She looked around the room, thinking. She searched under the chair, behind the books, inside the lamp. Then she found it. A small key taped under the desk. Her hands shook as she used it to unlock the drawer. Inside were things that made her breath stop. Daniel's journal. Pictures of Emily with the man in the black coat. Bank statements showing thousands of dollars missing. A copy of the life insurance paper, with Daniel's signature looking wrong, almost like a forgery. She covered her mouth in shock. Tears ran down her cheeks. Daniel had been trying to collect proof. He had been trying to expose something. But someone stopped him. Suddenly, she heard footsteps. The door creaked open. Emily stood there. Her eyes dark. Her face angry. Her hands clenched into fists. "What do you think you're doing?" she said in a low, dangerous voice. Margaret stepped back, clutching the drawer papers tightly. Emily entered the room slowly, her voice cold as ice. "You should have left when I told you to. You are making things harder for yourself." Margaret didn't speak. She couldn't. Fear froze her. Emily stepped even closer. "You need to stop looking into things that don't concern you. Daniel is gone. Accept it." Margaret whispered, Did you do something to him?" Emily's face changed for a split second. A flicker of something dark and guilty. Then she smiled. A smile that didn't reach her eyes. "You need to leave this house," she said. "Right now." Before Margaret could respond, another voice called from behind Emily. "Don't move." It was Detective Collins. He stepped into the room, holding his badge up. 2 officers followed behind him. Emily froze. Collins walked straight to her, looking angry. "We have enough questions for you, Mrs. Carter. And we will need you to come with us." Emily panicked. "I didn't do anything. This old woman is lying. She's crazy." The officers moved forward to stop her from escaping. Margaret stood there shaking, holding Daniel's journal against her chest. She had found the truth. And now, the real fight for justice was about to begin. The moment Emily was taken away in handcuffs, the entire house felt different. The air that had been heavy and suffocating just minutes before suddenly felt lighter, like a dark cloud had lifted. But the fear inside Margaret did not disappear. She stood frozen, holding Daniel's journal tightly, her old hand shaking. Detective Collins approached her gently. "Are you all right, Mrs. Carter?" Margaret nodded slowly, but her eyes were filled with confusion and fear. "What happens now?" Collins glanced at the officers escorting Emily to the police car. "Now we follow the evidence. And right now, she has a lot to answer for." But before they could take Emily away, she turned her head and screamed, "You'll regret this, old woman. You don't know what you're doing." Her voice echoed through the hallway like a warning. A cold warning. The officers pushed her into the car and drove away. Margaret watched until the vehicle disappeared from the street, but her heart never calmed. Something inside her whispered that the trouble was far from over. Detective Collins stayed behind to search the house more thoroughly. "We need to collect everything," he said. "If Daniel kept secrets, they're probably here." Margaret led him back into the study. Her hands were still trembling from the confrontation. Collins took the journal from her gently and began flipping through the pages. Daniel wrote everything. His fears. His suspicions. His discoveries. Page after page, Margaret learned things she never knew about her own home. Daniel had been tracking Emily for months. He had found hidden bank accounts, strange messages from unknown numbers, transfers of large amounts of money, receipts for items he never bought, photos of Emily meeting the same man in the black coat at different places in the city. Daniel had even written, "I think I'm in danger. If something happens to me, it won't be an accident." Margaret felt her knees weaken. "Detective," she whispered, "you need to catch the man in the black coat. He knows something." Collins nodded. "We will. But one thing doesn't make sense yet." Margaret looked up, worried. "What?" Emily was nervous, scared of being caught. But she wasn't surprised when we arrived. Usually, suspects panic. But she acted like she knew we were coming. Margaret frowned. "What does that mean?" Collins's eyes darkened. "It means someone might have warned her." Margaret froze. "Someone inside the police." "It's possible," he said quietly. "Or someone close to her who's watching everything." Margaret's stomach twisted. If Emily had people helping her, she wasn't done fighting. While Collins continued searching the house, Margaret walked into Daniel's bedroom. Everything smelled like him. His jacket still hung on the chair. His favorite watch still lay on the nightstand. She touched it gently, tears forming again. "Mom, if anything happens to me." His voice kept echoing in her mind. She opened his closet and found more things tucked away behind his clothes, notes, printed emails, receipts. Daniel had been trying to save himself. But he ran out of time. Suddenly, her phone buzzed. She wiped her tears and looked. Unknown number, you should have stayed quiet. Her hand slipped, and the phone fell on the carpet. Her heart hammered inside her chest. She picked it up again. Another message appeared instantly. Unknown number, she was supposed to handle you. Now we will. Margaret dropped the phone and backed away. Detective, she shouted. Collins rushed in and grabbed the phone. His eyes widened as he read the messages. This isn't coming from Emily, he said. Then who? Margaret whispered. He took a slow breath. Someone who didn't expect her to get caught. Someone who still wants to scare you. Margaret sat on the bed shaking. You need protection, Collins said. You can't stay here. But where can I go? She asked. Collins thought for a moment. I'll take you to a safe place. Somewhere no one will find you. Margaret agreed, and within minutes, they left the house. Collins placed her in the back of his unmarked police car and drove through quiet, empty streets. Margaret looked outside the window and felt like someone was watching her from every corner. They arrived at a small safe house on the edge of town, a quiet cabin surrounded by tall trees. Collins unlocked the door and guided her inside. This place is secure, he said. No one knows about it except the department. Margaret nodded, still scared. She sat on the sofa, trying to steady her breath. Collins walked around the cabin checking the windows and the back door. He made sure everything was locked. Then he sat in front of her. We need to keep you here until we find the man helping Emily, he said. You are our most important witness. Detective, Margaret whispered, do you think Emily killed Daniel? Collins looked down for a moment before answering. I think she was involved. But I don't think she acted alone. Margaret felt her heart twist. The man in the black coat. Collins nodded. And maybe others. Her stomach dropped. How many people? We're trying to find out. Collins's phone buzzed, and he stepped outside to take the call. Margaret sat alone, hugging her arms tightly. Suddenly, she heard a faint scratching sound outside the cabin wall. Her breath caught in her throat. She held still, listening. Then it stopped. Silence. She waited. Then the sound came again. This time louder. Like someone dragging something across the wall. Detective, she whispered. But he was still outside. She stood slowly and stepped toward the window. Her legs were shaking. She pulled the curtain a tiny inch, just enough to peek outside. Her heart nearly stopped. A man in a black coat was standing near the trees. Watching the cabin. Watching her. She gasped and stumbled backward. Collins rushed inside. What happened? He's here, she whispered. He's outside. Collins ran to the window. But the man was gone. He grabbed his radio. Unit 12 requesting backup at safe location. Possible suspect sighting. Margaret held her chest, breathing fast. You said no one knows about this place, she said with trembling voice. He shouldn't know, Collins said. Unless. He stopped mid-sentence. Unless what? She asked. Unless someone leaked it. Margaret covered her mouth. Someone is helping him. Collins nodded. Minutes later, 2 patrol cars arrived. Officers surrounded the cabin, searching the woods. But they found nothing. The man disappeared as if he was never there. After the officers left, Collins sat beside Margaret again. Listen to me, he said firmly. We will catch him. But you must stay strong. She nodded weakly. Night fell. The cabin became dark and quiet. Collins sat near the doorway, watching, guarding, waiting. Margaret lay on the couch, unable to sleep, her mind full of fear. Around midnight, Collins's radio buzzed. He stepped outside to speak with an officer from the station. Margaret heard only bits and pieces of his conversation. Emily isn't talking. She's demanding a lawyer. The man might leave town. We have to move fast. Suddenly, the cabin's lights flickered. Then went out completely. The entire room plunged into darkness. "Detective," she called out. No answer. Only silence. Her heart pounded. She slowly stood and reached for a flashlight on the table. The beam lit the shadows, but the cabin felt heavier, colder. "Detective Collins," she called again, louder this time. Still no answer. She walked slowly toward the door, each step filled with dread. When she touched the doorknob, her hand froze. It was warm. Someone had touched it recently. She pulled her hand back. Something moved behind her. She spun around, flashlight shaking. The back door was slightly open. Just an inch. Enough for someone to slip inside. Her breath caught. "Detective," she whispered again, but she knew it wasn't him. Suddenly, a hand grabbed her shoulder. She screamed. And Collins rushed inside from the front door, gun drawn. "It's me," he said quickly. "Are you hurt?" Margaret shook her head, terrified. Someone came in. He inspected the back door. "He was here," Collins said, voice tense. "He cut the power. He's trying to scare you." Margaret felt weak. Why is he doing this? Collins looked at her with serious eyes. "Because you found the truth. And he doesn't want you alive to tell it." She sat down, shaking uncontrollably. "What about Emily? Will she talk?" Collins sighed. "She refused everything. But she told us one thing." Margaret looked up. "What did she say?" "The man in the black coat, his name is Robert Hale. And he was more than just her secret lover." Margaret swallowed hard. "Who is he, then?" Collins hesitated for a long moment before speaking. "He's part of a dangerous group involved in financial crimes. Daniel found out about them. That's why he was killed." Margaret felt her whole body go cold. "Emily helped them." "She did," Collins said. "And now they want to cover everything." Margaret clenched her fists. "So they'll keep coming." Collins nodded slowly. "Yes. Until we stop them." A long silence filled the cabin. Margaret took a deep breath. "Detective, whatever I need to do, whoever I need to face, I will do it. For Daniel." Collins looked at her with new respect. "Then we fight this together." Outside, the wind began to rise. The trees swayed, creating eerie shadows. Somewhere in the distance, a branch snapped loudly. The man in the black coat was still out there, waiting, watching, planning. And soon, he would make his next move. Margaret sat on the wooden bench outside the courthouse, her hands shaking slightly as she waited for the final decision. She looked older now, as if the long months of investigation had taken years away from her life. But there was also something new in her eyes, strength. The kind of strength she did not know she had before Daniel's death. The cold wind brushed against her face, but she did not move. She wanted to feel everything. Every second. Every breath. Every moment that brought her closer to justice. Detective Collins stepped out of the doors and came to sit beside her. "The judge is almost ready," he said quietly. Margaret nodded, not taking her eyes off the big brown doors. "I still remember that day," she whispered. "The day she told me to get out of the church. I didn't know why she hated me so much. I didn't know she was hiding something so dark." Collins looked at her with a heavy heart. He had seen many cases, some worse, some strange, but there was something about Margaret's calm pain that stayed with him. Inside the courtroom, Emily sat with her hands locked in metal cuffs. She looked pale, tired, and angry. Her eyes were cold but filled with fear. Jason sat beside her, refusing to look at her. He had turned against her to save himself, giving information to the police in exchange for a lighter sentence. But even with that, he still faced years behind bars. Emily stared at the judge as he took his seat. She wanted to scream, wanted to fight, but she knew the truth was too strong. Too much proof. Too many lies she couldn't hide anymore. Margaret walked into the courtroom slowly, her steps soft, steady, and full of determination. She sat down behind the prosecutor, and for a brief moment, Emily turned and looked straight at her. Their eyes met, one filled with guilt and hatred, the other with quiet strength. The judge began speaking. His voice was calm but firm. He talked about the evidence, the insurance fraud, the hidden relationship with Jason, the forged signatures, and the suspicious circumstances around Daniel's death. Margaret closed her eyes for a second when she heard Daniel's name. She imagined his smile, the way he used to call her every night, the way he always hugged her tightly before leaving. Emily tried to interrupt the judge twice, saying it was all a misunderstanding, that she never meant for anything bad to happen. But her voice cracked every time she spoke. The lies that once felt easy to say now fell apart like thin paper. The judge did not let her finish. He simply continued reading the charges. When the judge finally announced the sentence, the entire courtroom fell silent. Emily would spend many years in prison, not only for insurance fraud, but also for playing a direct role in Daniel's death. Jason received an additional sentence for his part in planning the staged accident. Emily screamed, "This is wrong. I didn't mean it. It was supposed to save us." But the officers held her tightly and pulled her back. Margaret watched quietly, her eyes calm but sad. She did not smile. She did not celebrate. She only breathed slowly, feeling the weight leave her chest. It wasn't happiness. It was relief. After everything, after all the lies, threats, and sleepless nights, she finally felt that Daniel's voice had been heard. After the sentencing, Margaret stepped outside the courthouse again. The sun was brighter now, warm against her skin. She looked up at the sky and whispered, "Daniel, it's over now." Collins joined her outside and said, "You did it. You never stopped fighting." Margaret shook her head softly. "I didn't do it alone. You helped me, and Daniel helped me too. He left so many signs. I just followed them." She sold Daniel and Emily's house a few weeks later. She donated most of the money to create a small community center in Daniel's name. It was a place where young people could learn, talk, and get support. She wanted his memory to bring light instead of pain. She wanted other mothers to never feel alone the way she once did. On the day the center opened, Margaret stood near the entrance holding a small picture of Daniel. She placed the frame on a shelf with a quiet smile. Children ran around, laughing and shouting. Parents walked inside with hope in their eyes. It was the first time in months that the air felt alive around her. The world seemed peaceful again. Later that evening, Margaret visited Daniel's grave. She brought fresh white flowers and placed them gently on the ground. She sat beside the grave and began talking to him softly. "I found the truth, Daniel," she said. "They tried to hide it. They tried to silence me. They even tried to make me leave like I was nothing, but I didn't give up. I did everything I could. For you." Her voice trembled slightly, but she continued speaking. "I wish you were here. I wish I could hug you one more time. But wherever you are, I hope you can see that I never stopped loving you." The wind moved gently, making the leaves dance around her. For a moment, she felt as if Daniel was right there with her, sitting beside her the way he used to when he was a child. She wiped her tears slowly, took a deep breath, and stood up. The sky was turning orange as the sun went down. She looked at the horizon and whispered, "They couldn't break me. And they couldn't take your memory away." Margaret walked away from the grave with a small, peaceful smile. She knew life would never be the same again, but she also knew she had honored her son. She had found justice. She had found truth. She had found her strength. And as she walked home, the world felt different, not perfect, not whole, but safe again. She finally felt free.